The hand that closed around Beatrice Anderson's wrist was calloused and firm, and she knew in that instant that her desperate gamble had failed. The shopkeeper's face was red with fury as he yanked her back from the doorway, the stolen loaf of bread tumbling from beneath her threadbare shawl onto the dusty wooden floor of the general store. It was July in 1878 in Porterville, California, and the summer heat pressed down on the small town like a weight, but Beatrice felt cold all through as she stared at the evidence of her crime lying there in the shaft of afternoon sunlight. "Thief!" Mr. Henderson bellowed, his grip tightening enough to make her gasp. "I knew you were trouble the moment you walked in here, girl, eyeing my goods like a hungry coyote. Sheriff's going to hear about this, mark my words." Beatrice's heart hammered against her ribs. She was 20 years old, but in that moment she felt ancient and bone-tired, worn down by weeks of struggle and worry. "Please," she whispered, hating the tremor in her voice. "Please, sir, I can explain. My sister? She's only 8 years old, and she hasn't eaten in 2 days. I have no money, no family here, nobody to turn to. I would never steal otherwise, I swear it. Please, I'm begging you." The shopkeeper's expression didn't soften one bit. If anything, his jaw set harder, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Everybody's got a sob story, miss. That don't give you the right to take what isn't yours. Henderson's General Store has been in this town for 15 years, and I won't have thieves making a mockery of honest business. Sheriff Dalton will sort you out proper." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Beatrice could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting up like rustling leaves. Shame burned hot in her cheeks, mixing with the fear that made her hands shake. What would happen to little Rose if Beatrice was thrown in jail? The girl was back in the tiny room they rented above the saloon, lying on the narrow bed with fever-bright eyes, too weak to even sit up properly. Their mother had died 6 months ago, back in Missouri, and their father had been gone long before that, disappeared into a bottle and never climbed back out. Beatrice had brought Rose west with dreams of a better life, of finding work as a seamstress or a teacher, but Porterville had proven as unwelcoming as everywhere else. The jobs she found never lasted long enough, never paid enough, and now they were down to their last few coins with the rent overdue and no food in their bellies. "I said please," she tried again, her voice breaking. "I'll work off the debt. I'll scrub your floors, organize your stock, anything. Just don't call the sheriff. My sister needs me. She's sick and scared and all alone. She'll die without someone to care for her." Henderson shook his head, already turning toward the back of the store where he kept his office. "Should have thought of that before you turned criminal. Hold her, someone. I'm fetching the law." A rough hand grabbed her other arm, and Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes. This was the end then. She had tried so hard, had fought so desperately to keep them both alive, and it was all going to end with her in a cell and Rose dying alone in a rented room. The injustice of it, the sheer cruel unfairness, made her want to scream. "How much for the bread?" The voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a knife, deep and steady and completely calm. Beatrice twisted her head to see who had spoken, and found herself looking at a man she had never seen before. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and lean hips, clad in dusty denim and worn leather. His hat was pushed back just enough to reveal dark hair and a face that was all hard angles and sun-bronzed skin. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, held it. They were the color of storm clouds, a gray so light it was almost silver, and they were fixed on the shopkeeper with an intensity that made Henderson hesitate in his tracks. "What's that?" the shopkeeper said, frowning. The stranger stepped forward, his boots making soft sounds on the floorboards. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of, who had no need to prove anything to anyone. There was a gun belt slung low on his hips, the holster tied down in the way of someone who knew how to use what he carried, but his hands hung loose at his sides, relaxed and unthreatening. "I asked how much for the bread," he repeated. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "The lady needs it for her sister. I'll pay. No need to involve the law over something so small." Henderson's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. "Small? This is theft, mister. Pure and simple. The law is exactly what this situation calls for. Can't have every down on their luck drifter thinking they can just help themselves to my merchandise." The stranger's expression didn't change, but something in his stillness shifted, became more pronounced. "I understand your position, and I'm offering to make it right. So again, how much for the bread? And maybe add in a few other things while you're at it. Some dried beef, beans, whatever you'd recommend for someone recovering from illness. He was already pulling money from his pocket, real silver dollars that gleamed in the afternoon light, streaming through the windows. Henderson's eyes tracked the movement, clearly torn between his outrage and the sight of actual payment. The hand on Beatrice's arm loosened slightly. $10 should cover it, the stranger said, laying the coins on the counter with careful precision. That's more than fair for a loaf of bread and some provisions. The lady is free to go, and you've made a profit on the transaction. Everyone walks away satisfied. I don't know, Henderson muttered, but his resistance was crumbling. $10 was more than fair. It was generous to the point of absurdity. She still tried to steal from me. That's a matter of principle. And I respect that. The stranger's tone remained even, reasonable. But I'm asking you as a favor to let it go this time. Sometimes folks get desperate. Sometimes they make choices they wouldn't normally make. Doesn't mean they're bad people, just means they're human. Beatrice stared at him, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. This man, this complete stranger, was standing up for her, was paying for her crime, was speaking about her with a compassion she hadn't heard from anyone in so long, she had almost forgotten what it sounded like. Henderson grumbled something under his breath, but he picked up the coins, testing their weight in his palm. Fine, he said at last. Fine, but I don't want to see her face in here again unless she's got money to pay. You understand me, girl? Beatrice nodded frantically. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I promise I'll never do anything like that again. The man holding her arm released her, stepping back with a disapproving snort. The stranger gathered up the bread from the floor, dusted it off, then moved through the store collecting other items. Dried meat wrapped in brown paper, a sack of beans, a small jar of honey, a tin of tea. He piled them all on the counter, added another $1, then bundled everything into a cloth sack. When he turned to Beatrice, she saw his face properly for the first time. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably no more than 25, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite and a mouth that seemed more accustomed to firm lines than smiles. There was a scar running through his left eyebrow, white against his tan skin, and another smaller one at the corner of his jaw. A working man's hands, scarred and strong. A working man's face, weathered by sun and wind and hard living. Come on, he said simply, holding out the sack. Let's get this food to your sister. Beatrice took the bundle with trembling hands, unable to find words. Her throat felt tight, her eyes hot with unshed tears. I don't understand, she managed. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Those storm-gray eyes studied her for a long moment, and she had the strangest feeling that he was seeing past her shabby dress and dirty face, seeing something deeper. My name is Colton Edwards, he said, and I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to watch someone you love suffer and feel powerless to stop it. So, I'm helping because I can, and because it's the right thing to do. Now, where's your sister? She led him out of the store in a daze, barely registering the stares of the townspeople who had gathered to watch the spectacle. The heat hit them like a physical blow the moment they stepped outside, the July sun beating down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Porterville. The town was small, just a handful of buildings clustered around the road that led north toward Fresno and south toward the bigger settlements. The Sierra Nevada mountains rose in the distance, hazy blue against the pale sky, beautiful and utterly indifferent to the struggles of the tiny humans scratching out their lives in the valley below. Above the saloon, Beatrice said quietly, pointing to the weathered two-story building across the street. We rent a room there. It's not much, but it's all we could afford. Colton nodded and fell into step beside her, his long legs easily matching her hurried pace. She was hyper-aware of him, of his size and his presence, of the way people stepped aside to let them pass. He carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it, and she found herself wondering who he was, where he had come from, what had brought him to Porterville on this particular day, at this particular moment. The stairs leading up to the second floor of the saloon were narrow and creaky, and the hallway at the top was dim and smelled of old tobacco and stale beer. Beatrice fumbled with the key to their room, her hands still shaking from the aftermath of fear and shock. When the door swung open, revealing the tiny space with its single narrow bed, rickety table, and not much else. She felt a fresh wave of shame. This was what her dreams had come to. This was how far they had fallen. Rose was exactly where Beatrice had left her, curled on her side on the bed with her thin arms wrapped around herself. She looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile, her dark hair matted with sweat, and her face pale except for the hectic flush of fever on her cheeks. When she heard the door open, her eyes fluttered open, big brown eyes so like their mother's that it made Beatrice's heart ache. "Bea?" The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "Did you find food?" "I did, sweetheart." Beatrice rushed to the bed, setting the sack down and pulling out the bread with hands that shook. "I have bread and meat and everything. You're going to eat now, and you're going to get better." Rose's gaze drifted past her sister to the tall man standing in the doorway, and her eyes went wide. "Who's that?" "This is Mr. Edwards," Beatrice said, tearing off a piece of bread and pressing it into her sister's hand. "He's the one who got us this food. He's a very kind man." Colton stepped into the room, removing his hat as he did so. He looked around the tiny space with an expression that was hard to read, then crouched down beside the bed so he was at Rose's eye level. "Hello there," he said gently. "You must be Rose. Your sister told me you haven't been feeling well." Rose nodded shyly, nibbling on the bread with an expression of pure bliss. "I'm hungry all the time," she confessed. "But Bea doesn't have any money for food. She tries really hard, but everything costs too much." "Well, you've got food now," Colton said, "and you're going to eat every bit of it and get strong again, all right?" "All right." Rose managed a small smile, and even that simple expression seemed to exhaust her. Beatrice busied herself preparing more food, tearing the bread into manageable pieces, unwrapping the dried beef, and cutting it into small portions that would be easy for Rose to eat. Her mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened in the last half hour. This man, this Colton Edwards, had saved her from jail, had paid for food she couldn't afford, had followed her to this shabby room without judgment or expectation. She couldn't make sense of it, couldn't fit it into the pattern of how the world usually worked. "You need to fetch a doctor," Colton said quietly, standing up and moving to where Beatrice worked at the small table. "That fever needs to be looked at properly." Beatrice kept her eyes on the food she was preparing. "I can't afford a doctor. I already told you, I have almost no money. Everything I had went to keeping the roof over our heads, and now even that's run out. The landlord wants his rent by the end of the week, or we're on the street. How much do you owe?" She shook her head. "I can't let you pay for that too. You've already done so much, more than anyone has ever done for us. I can't take advantage of your kindness like that." "It's not taking advantage if I'm offering." His voice was patient, implacable. "How much?" $8, she whispered, plus another $1 I borrowed from the woman who runs the boarding house down the street. She was kind enough to loan it to me when I thought I might find work at the hotel, but that position went to someone else. Colton was already pulling out his money again. He counted out 9 silver dollars and placed them on the table beside the food. "There, that's settled. Now about the doctor." "I can't," Beatrice said desperately, looking up at him with eyes that burned. "Don't you understand? I can't just keep taking from you. I don't even know you. I can't repay this. I have nothing to give you, no way to make this right. What you've already done is too much." He regarded her steadily, and again she had that sense of being truly seen, of his gray eyes cutting through all her defenses and pride to the scared, exhausted woman beneath. "I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town," he said. "It's not fancy, but it's solid. Good land, good water. I run cattle, breed horses. I've been managing it on my own since my father died 2 years ago, and I could use some help around the place. Someone to cook, clean, tend the garden. Keep the house from falling apart around my ears. If you're willing to work, I'm willing to give you and your sister a place to stay. Meals, a roof, safety, room for both of you. The work wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest and it would give you a fresh start." Beatrice stared at him, her mind struggling to process the offer. Leave this awful room, have steady work, steady food, a place for Rose to recover. It sounded too good to be true. It sounded like a dream. "Why?" she asked again, because she had to understand. "Why would you do this for us? What do you want from me?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. "I want someone to help me run my ranch, that's all. I'm not asking for anything improper, if that's what you're worried about. You'd have your own room, your own space. I just need the help, and you need the work. Seems like a fair exchange to me." "But you don't know anything about me," she protested. "I could be a terrible cook. I could be lazy or dishonest or any number of things." "You tried to steal bread to feed your sick sister," Colton said simply. "You didn't take anything for yourself. You didn't go for the money box or the expensive goods, just bread. That tells me you're desperate, not dishonest. And the way you're caring for your sister, the way you're trying to hold things together, that tells me you're not lazy. So I'm willing to take the risk if you are." Rose's voice came from the bed, weak but hopeful. "Can we go, Bay? Please? I don't like it here. It's scary at night and it smells bad, and I want to see horses. I love horses." Beatrice looked at her sister, at those big trusting eyes and that thin little face, and felt something crack inside her chest. Rose deserved better than this, deserved safety and stability and the chance to be a child instead of a burden. And if this man, this stranger with his storm-gray eyes and quiet strength, was offering them that chance, could she really afford to refuse out of pride? "All right," she heard herself say. "All right, we'll come with you. And I'll work hard, Mr. Edwards. I promise you won't regret this." "Colton," he corrected. "If we're going to be living on the same property, might as well use first names. And I'm going to fetch the doctor now. You get Rose fed and cleaned up. I'll be back within the hour, and then we'll get you both out to the ranch before dark." He was gone before she could protest again, his boots thudding down the stairs and leaving her alone with her sister and a table full of food and $9 silver that felt like a fortune. Rose was crying softly, tears streaming down her cheeks as she ate, and Beatrice went to her, pulling the little girl into her arms and holding her tight. "It's going to be all right," she whispered, saying it as much to herself as to Rose. "We're going to be all right now. Everything's going to be different." She could only pray that she was right. The doctor who arrived an hour later was an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands. He examined Rose thoroughly, asked questions about her symptoms, then prescribed rest, nutrition, and a tonic that he promised would help with the fever. Colton paid him without blinking, added the cost of the medicine, and thanked him for coming so quickly. By the time the sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon, they were ready to leave. Beatrice packed their few belongings into the battered carpet bag that had traveled with them from Missouri. It didn't take long. They had so little. A change of clothes each, a few personal items that had belonged to their mother, a small Bible with a cracked leather cover. That was the sum total of what they owned in the world. She felt a strange mixture of shame and relief as she closed the bag. Shame that this was all they had managed to hold on to. Relief that there was so little to carry, so little tying them to this miserable room and this hard town. Colton carried Rose down the stairs wrapped in a blanket, the little girl's head resting on his shoulder with an ease that suggested she already trusted him completely. Beatrice followed with the carpet bag, stopping only to settle their account with the saloon keeper and to pay back the woman at the boarding house. The woman tried to refuse the money, saying Beatrice needed it more, but Beatrice insisted. She had stolen once today already. She wouldn't add unpaid debts to her list of shames. Outside, a wagon waited. It was sturdy and well-maintained, pulled by a pair of dark bay horses with intelligent eyes and glossy coats. Colton settled Rose in the back on a nest of blankets he had clearly prepared for exactly this purpose, then helped Beatrice up onto the bench seat before climbing up himself and taking the reins. As they rolled out of Porterville, Beatrice found herself looking back at the town, at the dusty streets and weathered buildings that had been the site of her lowest moment. The sun was painting everything gold and orange now, softening the harsh edges, making it look almost beautiful. But she felt no regret at leaving, only a cautious, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. The ranch, when they reached it as twilight was settling over the valley, was more than Beatrice had dared to imagine. The house was a sturdy single-story structure, built of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and one side. There was a barn nearby, substantial and well-kept, and several smaller outbuildings scattered across the property. Fenced paddocks held horses that raised their heads to watch the wagons approach, their coats gleaming in the fading light. Beyond them, she could see cattle grazing in larger pastures, and farther still, the land rolled away toward the mountains in gentle waves of golden grass. "It's beautiful," she said softly, and meant it. Colton helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "My father built most of it," he said. Started with just a cabin and a dream, and put 30 years of his life into making it what it is. I've tried to honor that, to keep it going and make it even better. There's still a lot of work to be done, but the bones are solid. He carried Rose inside, and Beatrice followed, her eyes trying to take in everything at once. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and furniture that was simple but well made. There was a kitchen area with a cast iron stove and a good solid table. A hallway led to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean, but had that slightly neglected feel of a space maintained by someone with more important things to worry about than perfect housekeeping. "There are 3 bedrooms," Colton said, moving down the hallway. "I used the one at the end. This one here is the largest of the other 2. Figured you and Rose could share until she's feeling better, and then, if you wanted, one of you could take the smaller room across the hall." He pushed open a door to reveal a good-sized room with a real bed, not just a narrow cot, and a dresser and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Clean sheets and quilts were already on the bed, and there was a rag rug on the floor and curtains at the window. It was simple and plain, but after the squalor of the room above the saloon, it looked like luxury to Beatrice. "This is ours?" Rose asked in wonder, lifting her head from Colton's shoulder to look around with wide eyes. "It's yours," he confirmed, setting her gently on the bed. "For as long as you need it." Beatrice had to turn away, pressing her hand to her mouth to hold back the sob that threatened to escape. She had been strong for so long, had held herself together through their mother's death, and their flight west, and all the endless disappointments and struggles since. But this kindness, this generosity from a man who owed them nothing, was breaking through all her carefully maintained defenses. "Thank you," she whispered when she could trust her voice. "Thank you so much. I don't know how we'll ever repay you, but I swear I'll work harder than anyone you've ever employed. I'll earn my keep. I promise." "I know you will," Colton said quietly. "Now, let me show you the rest of the house, and then I'll make us some supper. You both need to eat properly, and then Rose needs to take her medicine and get some real sleep." The tour didn't take long. Besides the bedrooms, there was a small washroom with a pump that brought water directly into the house, a luxury Beatrice had only dreamed of. The furniture throughout was handmade and solid, built to last. Everything spoke of a man who valued quality and durability over flash, who took care of what he had and made things to serve a purpose rather than to impress. Supper was simple but filling. Colton proved surprisingly capable in the kitchen, frying up bacon and eggs and making biscuits that were only slightly burned on the bottom. They ate at the kitchen table, Rose managing to finish most of her plate before her eyes started drooping with exhaustion. Beatrice fed her the medicine the doctor had left, then tucked her into the big bed and sat beside her until the little girl fell asleep, one thin hand curled around her sister's fingers. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Colton washing the dishes in a basin. He glanced up as she entered, and for the first time since they had met, she saw something almost like uncertainty cross his face. "She all right?" he asked. "She's sleeping. Finally sleeping without crying or tossing with fever." Beatrice moved to help him, picking up a dish towel and starting to dry the clean plates. "I can't thank you enough for the doctor, for the medicine, for everything." They worked in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the splash of water and the clink of dishes. Outside, night had fully fallen, and through the window, Beatrice could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, brighter and more numerous than she had ever seen them in town. "Can I ask you something?" she said at last. "Of course. Why did you really do this? I know you said you needed help on the ranch, and maybe that's true, but I think there's more to it than that. Men don't usually offer to take in strange women and their sisters just because they need a housekeeper." Colton was quiet for a long moment, his hands stilling in the dishwater. When he spoke, his voice was low and tinged with something that might have been old pain. "I had a sister once, Emily. She was 5 years younger than me, and she was everything good in the world, smart and funny and kind. When my mother died, Emily was only 10. My father did his best, but he was a rancher, not a nursemaid. So I took care of her, taught her to read better, to cipher, to ride, made sure she ate properly and had clean clothes, and felt loved. And I thought I was doing a good job. Thought we were doing all right." He paused, staring down at his wet hands. "When she was 16, she got sick. Started out as just a cold, but it settled in her lungs and wouldn't leave. We were struggling that year. Drought had killed half the grass, and we lost a lot of cattle. Money was tight. I kept telling myself she would get better on her own, that we couldn't afford the doctor, that we needed to save every penny for the ranch. By the time I realized how bad it really was, it was too late. She died 3 days after I finally brought the doctor out, and the last thing she said to me was that she was sorry for being such a burden. Beatrice felt tears sting her eyes. Colton, I'm so sorry. I swore that day I would never let money stand between someone and the help they needed, he continued, his voice rough. That I would never let pride or worry about the cost stop me from doing what was right. So, when I saw you in that store today, saw your desperation and your fear, and heard you talking about your sick sister, I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't be that person again, the one who stands by while someone suffers because they can't afford help. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, she said softly. And for what it's worth, what happened to your sister wasn't your fault. You were young and you were scared and you were doing the best you could. She wouldn't have wanted you to carry that guilt. Maybe. He pulled his hands out of the water and dried them on a towel, his expression distant. Doesn't make it any easier to live with. But helping you today, bringing you both here, it feels like maybe I'm making it right somehow. Like maybe Emily would approve. I think she would, Beatrice said. I think she would be proud of the man you've become. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the grief in his eyes mixed with something else, something warmer. You should get some rest, he said. You've had a long day, and tomorrow we'll need to start figuring out the new routine. I usually rise before dawn to start the chores. You don't need to get up that early, but breakfast around 6 would be good if you're up to it. I'll be up, she promised. And Colton, thank you, not just for today, but for giving us a chance. For seeing us as people worth helping instead of just problems to be avoided. That means more than you know. You're welcome, Beatrice. Now go on, get some sleep. She did as he suggested, slipping into the bedroom where Rose slept peacefully and changing into her nightgown before climbing into the other side of the big bed. The mattress was comfortable, the quilts warm, and the room smelled of fresh air and clean cotton instead of tobacco smoke and despair. As she lay there in the darkness, listening to her sister's steady breathing and the distant sound of horses moving in the paddock, Beatrice felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt safe. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Beatrice rose early each morning, usually before the sun had fully cleared the eastern horizon, and set about making breakfast for the three of them. Colton was always up before her, already out dealing with the animals or checking on some aspect of the ranch that needed attention. He would come in for breakfast smelling of hay and horses and the cool morning air, his hands freshly washed and his hair damp from dunking his head in the water trough. Rose recovered quickly with proper food and medicine and rest. Within a week, the fever had broken completely, and the little girl was exploring the ranch with boundless energy, delighting in the chickens that scratched in the yard, and the barn cats that wound around her legs, and especially the horses that would come to the fence when she called to them. Colton was patient with her endless questions, teaching her the names of the animals and letting her help with small chores like collecting eggs and filling water buckets. Beatrice threw herself into the work with a determination that bordered on ferocious. She scrubbed every surface in the house until it gleamed. She organized the kitchen, the pantry, the linen closet. She mended clothes and curtains, weeded the neglected vegetable garden, and coaxed it back to life. Learned to cook on the temperamental stove until she could produce meals that were genuinely good rather than merely edible. She wanted to prove her worth, to show Colton that his faith in her had not been misplaced, to earn the sanctuary he had given them. But as the weeks passed and summer deepened into August, Beatrice found herself working hard for reasons that had less to do with gratitude and more to do with the man himself. She had always thought of herself as practical, not given to flights of fancy or romantic notions. Life had been too hard for such luxuries. But there was something about Colton Edwards that got past her defenses, that made her notice things she had no business noticing. The way he moved, all lean muscle and easy grace. The rare smile that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. The gentleness in those big scarred hands when he helped Rose onto a horse or fixed a broken toy. The sound of his voice in the early morning, low and rough from sleep. The intelligence in his eyes, the quiet competence with which he handled every aspect of running the ranch, the fundamental decency that seemed to guide all his actions. She found herself looking forward to mealtimes, to the conversations they shared over breakfast and supper. He was well-read despite his limited formal education, interested in everything from politics to poetry to the science of selective breeding in cattle. He listened when she talked, really listened, asking thoughtful questions and seeming genuinely interested in her opinions. He never made her feel foolish or inferior, never dismissed her thoughts the way so many men did with women. He treated her as an equal, as a partner in the work of keeping the ranch running, and that alone was intoxicating. She was falling in love with him. The realization came to her one evening in late August, as she stood at the window watching him work with a young horse in the corral. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, and he was moving in patient circles with the colt, teaching it to accept a lead rope with calm persistence and quiet words. He looked like something out of a painting, all broad shoulders and narrow hips and easy strength, and she felt her heart turn over in her chest with a longing so intense it was almost painful. It was foolish, she told herself, dangerous. He was her employer, her benefactor. He had taken them in out of kindness and memory and a desire to right old wrongs, not out of any romantic interest in her. She was a woman with nothing to offer him, no dowry, no family connections, no prospects beyond what he had given her. Falling in love with him was the height of presumption, a recipe for heartbreak and humiliation. But knowing it was foolish didn't make it stop. Didn't make her pulse race any less when he smiled at her over breakfast. Didn't make her less aware of him when they worked side by side in the kitchen, their hands sometimes brushing as they passed dishes or utensils. Didn't stop her from lying awake at night in her room, listening to the sounds of him moving around the house and wondering what it would be like to have the right to go to him, to be held by him, to wake up beside him with his arms around her and his breath warm against her hair. She did her best to hide it, to maintain the careful boundaries between employer and employee, but she wasn't sure she was succeeding. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something intense and searching that made her breath catch and her cheeks warm. Sometimes their hands would touch and linger for just a moment too long before they both pulled away. Sometimes the air between them would feel charged with something electric, something unspoken but unmistakable. It was Rose who finally pushed things past the careful dance of unacknowledged attraction. The little girl had bloomed in the weeks since they had arrived at the ranch, filling out and gaining color and energy. She followed Colton around like a devoted puppy, chattering endlessly about anything and everything, and he bore it with amused patience. But more than that, Beatrice could see that he genuinely cared for her sister, that he had transferred some of the love he had felt for his own lost sister onto Rose. One evening in early September, they were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the stars come out. Rose was between them on the porch swing, her head resting on Colton's arm and her feet in Beatrice's lap. The child had been unusually quiet all evening, and now she spoke up in a voice that was uncharacteristically serious. "Colton, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Sprout. What's on your mind?" "Are you going to marry my sister?" Beatrice felt her heart stop. She opened her mouth to scold Rose, to tell her that was an inappropriate question, but no sound came out. Beside them, Colton had gone very still. "Why do you ask that?" he said carefully. "Because I see how you look at her," Rose said with the devastating honesty of children, "and how she looks at you. Like how Mama used to look at Papa before he got mean, like you make each other happy. And I heard Mrs. Thompson in town say that you two were practically married already, living together like this, and that it was a scandal waiting to happen. So I thought maybe you should just go ahead and do it for real. Then we could stay here forever and be a family, and I wouldn't have to worry about losing Bea or losing you." The silence that followed was so profound that Beatrice could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She didn't dare look at Colton, didn't dare move or breathe. She wanted the porch to open up and swallow her whole, wanted to disappear into the earth and never face the humiliation of this moment. "Rose, sweetheart, you can't just ask people things like that," she managed at last, her voice strangled. "Mr. Edwards has been incredibly kind to us, but that doesn't mean he wants to marry me. We're employees, that's all. We work for him. Marriage is something completely different, something that requires love and commitment and all sorts of things that aren't present here." "But I thought you did love each other," Rose said, confusion clear in her voice. "You act like it." "Rose, that's enough." Beatrice stood up abruptly, unable to bear any more. "It's past your bedtime. Let's get you inside and settled." "But B," now Rose. The little girl, recognizing that tone, subsided and allowed herself to be led inside. Beatrice tucked her into bed with hands that shook, kissed her forehead, and fled to the kitchen. She stood at the sink with her hands braced on the counter, breathing hard, trying to get her racing heart under control. This was a disaster. She would have to leave now, would have to take Rose and go back to Porterville and try to find work, because how could they stay here after this? How could she face Colton every day knowing he knew how she felt? Knowing he had been put in the impossible position of having to reject her? The sound of boots on the floorboards made her tense. She kept her eyes fixed on the window, on her own faint reflection in the dark glass. "Beatrice, I'm so sorry," she said quickly before he could speak. "Rose shouldn't have said those things. She's just a child. She doesn't understand how the world works. I'll talk to her, make sure she knows not to say anything like that again. And if you want us to leave, I understand. We've probably stayed too long anyway. I'm sure you're tired of having us underfoot. Beatrice, I can probably find something in town. The hotel might need help, or maybe one of the farms. It won't be easy, but we'll manage. We always have. You don't need to worry about us." "Beatrice, stop!" His hand on her shoulder was gentle but firm, turning her around to face him. She kept her eyes down, unable to meet his gaze, her cheeks burning with shame. "Look at me," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Please." There was something in his voice, something raw and vulnerable, that made her obey despite herself. When she raised her eyes to his, she found him looking at her with an expression that stole what little breath she had left. "Rose asked if I was going to marry you," he said slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I didn't answer her because the truth is complicated. But if you want the truth, Beatrice, here it is. I have wanted to ask you that question for weeks now. Every morning when I wake up and know you're here, every evening when we sit together and talk, every time I see you with your sister or working in the garden or just existing in my space and making it feel like a home instead of just a house, I think about what it would be like to have the right to call you mine, to have you stay not because you work for me, but because you want to be here, because you want to build a life with me." Beatrice stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "But I'm nobody," she whispered. "I have nothing. You could have any woman you wanted, someone with money and family and everything I don't have. Why would you want me?" "Because you're strong," he said simply. "Because you're brave and loyal and kind. Because you tried to steal bread for your sister, even though it terrified you. Because you work harder than anyone I've ever known. Because you make Rose laugh, and you've turned this house into a home. Because when I look at you, I see everything I want in a partner. Someone who understands hard work and hard times. Someone who doesn't need fancy things to be happy. Someone who loves fiercely and completely. Someone who makes me want to be a better man. Colton." His name was barely a breath on her lips. "I'm not good with words," he continued, and she could hear the nervousness in his voice now, the fear of rejection. "And I know this is probably too fast, too soon. We've only known each other a couple of months, but I'm 30 years old, Beatrice, and I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. So I'm asking. Not because Rose put the idea in my head, but because I want this. I want you. Will you marry me? Will you let me love you and take care of you and Rose for the rest of our lives?" Tears were streaming down her face now, and she didn't even try to stop them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course, yes. I love you too, Colton. I've loved you since that day in the store, when you stood up for me, when you saw me as a person instead of a problem. I've been so scared that you would realize what I felt and send us away, that I was ruining everything by wanting more than you were willing to give." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, brilliant and transforming. He cupped her face in his big hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears with infinite gentleness. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and the fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice even now, made her love him even more. "Please," she whispered. His lips on hers were soft and careful, a question rather than a demand. She melted into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him and the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss deepened slowly, sweetly, and she felt something settle in her chest, something that had been anxious and uncertain for so long, finally finding peace. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. We'll do this right, he said. I'll get you a ring, we'll go to town and talk to the minister, we'll do everything proper and legal. I want everyone to know that you're mine and I'm yours, that this is real and forever. I don't need a fancy ring, she protested, but she was smiling. You're getting one anyway, he said firmly. You're getting everything I can give you, Beatrice, everything you deserve. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Porterville, with half the town in attendance despite the short notice. Word had spread quickly about the rancher, who had paid for a thief's crime and then married her. And people were curious to see the woman who had captured the heart of the reserved Colton Edwards. Beatrice wore a dress that had been her mother's, simple but beautiful, with Rose serving as her only attendant in a new dress that Colton had insisted on buying for the occasion. As she stood at the altar and looked into Colton's eyes while the minister spoke the ancient words, Beatrice felt a joy so complete it was almost painful. 2 months ago, she had been at the absolute lowest point of her life, desperate and starving and caught stealing bread. Now she was here, marrying a man she loved beyond measure, with her sister healthy and happy and their future secure. It felt like a miracle. It felt like grace. The kiss that sealed their vows was chaste and brief, appropriate for the church setting, but Beatrice could feel the promise in it, the passion held carefully in check until they were alone. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and music and well wishes. People were kind, welcoming her into the community, with an openness that suggested they approved of the match, that they saw Colton's happiness and were glad for it. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Rose hugged Beatrice fiercely. "I'm so happy," the little girl whispered. "Now, we're really a family, forever and ever." "Forever and ever," Beatrice agreed, her throat tight with emotion. Colton had arranged for Rose to spend the night with one of the neighboring families, their nearest neighbors who had a daughter Rose's age. It was a kindness that Beatrice appreciated, a recognition that newlyweds needed time alone. When the last guests had gone and the house was finally quiet, she stood in the main room feeling suddenly nervous. This was her wedding night. She was married to Colton Edwards. They were husband and wife now, bound together in the eyes of God and the law. He came up behind her, his arms sliding around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "Hello, wife," he murmured against her ear, and the words sent shivers down her spine. "Hello, husband," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. The kiss he gave her then was nothing like the one in the church. This was deep and hungry, and full of all the desire they had been holding back for weeks. She responded with equal fervor, her hands sliding up into his hair, her body pressing against his. When he lifted her into his arms and carried her to his bedroom, their bedroom now, she went willingly, eagerly, ready to give herself to him completely. Their wedding night was everything she had hoped, and more. Colton was patient and tender, attuned to her every response, making sure her first time was filled with pleasure rather than pain. They learned each other's bodies in the lamplight, mapping skin and texture and the sounds that meant desire and satisfaction. When they finally came together, it felt like coming home, like two pieces that had always been meant to fit together, finally finding their proper place. Afterward, she lay curled against his side, her head on his chest and his arm around her shoulders, listening to his heartbeat slow and steady beneath her ear. "I love you," she said softly. "I don't think I can say it enough. I love you so much." "I love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than I thought I could love anyone. You're my everything, Beatrice. You and Rose both, my family. We're so lucky to have found you," she said. "Or that you found us, I suppose. If you hadn't walked into that store at exactly that moment, if you hadn't decided to help us, where would we be now?" "Don't think about that," he said firmly. "No point dwelling on what might have been. We're here now, together, and that's all that matters." She tilted her head up to kiss his jaw. "You're right. The past is past. Now we have the future to think about, a whole life to build together." "Any thoughts on what you want that life to look like?" he asked, his hand stroking up and down her arm in a soothing rhythm. "I want to make this ranch the best it can be," she said thoughtfully. "I want to help you build it into something we can be proud of, something we can pass down to our children someday. I want Rose to grow up happy and safe and educated, to have opportunities we never had. And I want us to be happy, Colton. I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life and never take for granted how lucky I am." "Children," he said, his voice warm with pleasure, You want children with me? Of course I do, don't you? I do, he said. God, yes, I do. I want a house full of children, if we're blessed that way. Want to watch them grow up on this land, learning to ride and work and be good people. Want to give them everything I didn't have, everything you didn't have. Then that's what we'll do, she said contentedly. Build a life, raise a family, grow old together. It sounds perfect. It sounds perfect, he agreed. The months that followed their wedding were busy and fulfilling. Beatrice threw herself into the role of ranch wife with determination, learning the rhythms of the seasons and the demands of the livestock. She expanded the vegetable garden, started a small orchard, learned to preserve food for the winter months. She took over the household accounts and proved to have a head for numbers that impressed Colton. She became friends with the neighboring ranch wives, joining their quilting circle and contributing to the community life of the valley. Rose thrived under the stability and love, growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. Colton arranged for her to attend the small school in Porterville, driving her into town each Monday morning and collecting her on Friday afternoons. The little girl proved to be bright and eager to learn, quickly catching up to and then surpassing her classmates. She still helped around the ranch on weekends and during school breaks, developing a special bond with the horses that led Colton to start teaching her to ride properly. For Beatrice, those months were a revelation in what life could be when you felt safe and loved. She had spent so long in survival mode, fighting for every scrap and never able to relax or plan for the future. Now she could think beyond tomorrow, could make plans and dream dreams, and know that Colton would be beside her, working toward those same goals. They were partners in every sense of the word, their strengths complementing each other, their weaknesses covered by the other's abilities. The physical aspect of their marriage remained passionate and tender. Colton never tired of showing her with his body what he felt in his heart, and she delighted in being able to touch him, to love him, to express her feelings in this most intimate way. There was no shame between them, no embarrassment, only a deep and abiding joy in their connection. In late spring, nearly a year after they had met, Beatrice realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought little of it, assuming the stress of the busy spring season had simply thrown her body off schedule. But when a second month passed and she began to feel queasy in the mornings and unusually tired in the afternoons, she allowed herself to hope. She didn't tell Colton immediately, not wanting to raise his hopes if she was wrong. Instead, she made a trip into town on the pretext of needing supplies and sought out the doctor. His examination confirmed what she had suspected. She was with child, due sometime in early January if his calculations were correct. The joy that flooded through her was so intense it brought tears to her eyes. A baby. Their baby. A child born of love and hope and the future they were building together. She thanked the doctor, paid him, and practically floated back to where she had left the wagon. All the way home, she planned how she would tell Colton, wanting it to be special and memorable. In the end, she couldn't wait for the perfect moment. The instant he walked in the door that evening, dusty and tired from a long day of moving cattle, she blurted it out. "I'm going to have a baby." He froze, staring at her with an expression of stunned disbelief. "What?" "A baby," she repeated, moving toward him with a smile that felt like it might split her face. "We're going to have a baby, Colton. I saw the doctor today and he confirmed it. I'm about 2 months along, due in January." For a moment, he didn't react at all, and she felt a flicker of worry. Then his face transformed, a joy so brilliant breaking across his features that it took her breath away. He let out a whoop that probably carried to the neighboring ranch and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist, his eyes shining. "We're going to have a baby. Beatrice, I don't even have words. This is the best news, the absolute best news. Are you all right? Is everything okay? What did the doctor say?" "I'm fine. Everything's fine," she assured him, touched by his immediate concern. "He said I'm healthy. The baby seems to be developing normally, and as long as I take care of myself, there's no reason to expect any problems." "You're not doing any heavy lifting anymore," he said immediately. "No hauling water or moving furniture or anything that might be too much. I'll hire someone to help with the housework, and you need to rest more and eat more, and..." She stopped his words with a kiss, laughing against his mouth. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. I can still work, still do most of what I've always done. I'll be careful, I promise, but you don't need to treat me like an invalid. I just want you safe," he said, his hands moving to her still flat stomach, with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "You and the baby both. You're my whole world, Beatrice. I can't lose you." "You won't," she said firmly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'm strong and healthy, and I have you to take care of me. Everything is going to be fine." Rose's reaction when they told her the news was predictably enthusiastic. The girl danced around the room, already planning how she would help with the baby and what games they would play and how she would teach the baby everything she knew. Her excitement was infectious, filling the house with an energy and joy that felt like a promise of good things to come. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Beatrice's body changed, her belly swelling with the growing life inside her, and Colton watched the transformation with an awe that never faded. He would spend hours with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick and move, marveling at the miracle of it. He read everything he could find about pregnancy and childbirth, determined to be prepared for every eventuality. He became even more protective, hovering over her to the point that she sometimes had to gently remind him to give her space. As winter approached and her due date drew near, they prepared the small bedroom across from their own as a nursery. Colton built a cradle with his own hands, carving it with care and sanding it until every surface was smooth as silk. Beatrice sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needle flying through the fabric as she created the necessities for their child. Rose contributed her own creations, drawings, and small toys she made from scraps of fabric and wood. The contractions started on a cold January night, waking Beatrice from sleep with their intensity. She lay still for a moment, timing them, making sure this was truly labor and not just the false pains the doctor had warned her about. When another wave hit 5 minutes after the first, she knew it was time. "Colton," she said, shaking his shoulder gently. "Colton, wake up. The baby is coming." He was awake instantly, alert in the way of someone used to midnight emergencies with livestock. "Now? Are you sure? What do you need? Should I get the doctor?" "Yes, now. And yes, you should get the doctor," she said, breathing through another contraction. "But don't panic. We have time. First babies usually take a while. Just help me get comfortable and then go fetch him." He did as she asked, though she could see the worry in his eyes. He settled her in their bed with pillows propped behind her, got her water and towels and everything the doctor had said might be needed, then rode hard for Porterville to bring back the physician. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Beatrice had known it would be hard, but the reality was worse than she had imagined. The pain came in waves that seemed to tear her apart, leaving her gasping and exhausted. Rose had been sent to stay with the neighbors, sparing the child from witnessing her sister's suffering. The doctor and Colton stayed with her throughout, the doctor monitoring her progress and Colton holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement, even when she cursed at him through the pain. As evening fell on that second day, the doctor finally pronounced her ready to push. It took every bit of strength she had left, every ounce of determination. But finally, as the last light was fading from the sky, their baby entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the room with sound and life. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, quickly checking the infant over before wrapping him in a clean blanket and placing him in Beatrice's arms. "A healthy baby boy. Congratulations." Beatrice stared down at the tiny face, the scrunched features and dark hair and perfect little hands, and felt her heart expand in a way she had never experienced before. This was her son, hers and Colton's, a whole new person who hadn't existed before, created from their love. "He's perfect," Colton breathed, leaning over to look at his son with wonder in his eyes. "Beatrice, he's absolutely perfect. You're perfect. You did it. I'm so proud of you. What should we name him?" she asked, unable to look away from the baby's face. "How about James?" Colton suggested. "After your father, if he was a good man. Or we could choose something else entirely, whatever you want." "James is good," she said softly. Her father hadn't been perfect, but he had loved them once before the drinking took him. It felt right to honor that love, to give their son a name that connected him to family, even as they created new traditions. "James Edwards. It suits him." "James," Colton repeated, reaching out to touch one tiny hand with a finger. The baby's fist closed around it instinctively, and she saw tears shine in her husband's eyes. "Welcome to the world, son. We're going to take such good care of you. You're going to have everything you need and more. I promise." The weeks that followed James's birth were exhausting, but filled with a happiness that bordered on euphoria. Beatrice had never been so tired in her life, functioning on broken sleep and stolen naps while the baby demanded to be fed every few hours. But she had also never been so content. Every time she looked at her son, every time Colton held the baby with that look of absolute devotion on his face, every time Rose cooed over her new brother, she felt blessed beyond measure. Colton proved to be a wonderful father, patient and gentle despite his inexperience. He took over as many of Beatrice's chores as he could, letting her rest and recover while he handled the housework along with his ranch duties. He walked the floor with James when the baby was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and bringing the infant to Beatrice for feedings in the night so she didn't have to get out of bed. Rose adapted to her new role as big sister with enthusiasm, helping in whatever ways she could and showing a maturity beyond her years. She was careful never to complain about the attention the baby received, seeming to understand that infants required constant care. Instead, she took pride in being useful, fetching things for Beatrice and entertaining James with silly faces and songs. As winter gave way to spring and James grew from a tiny newborn into a more robust infant, life on the ranch settled into a new normal. The rhythm was different now, shaped by the needs of a small child, but no less satisfying. If anything, the presence of the baby made everything feel more complete, more purposeful. They weren't just running a ranch anymore. They were building a legacy, creating something that would last beyond their own lifetimes. On a warm evening in May, when James was 4 months old and Rose was 10, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. James was asleep in Beatrice's arms, his small body warm and solid. Rose sat on the porch steps, playing with a kitten from the barn. Colton sat beside Beatrice on the swing, his arm around her shoulders, looking out over the land he loved. "Do you ever think about that day in the general store?" Beatrice asked softly, not wanting to wake the baby. "About how everything would be different if you hadn't walked in right then?" "Sometimes," Colton admitted, "but not with regret, with gratitude. That day brought me you, brought me all of this. I was so lonely before you came, Beatrice. I didn't even realize how lonely until suddenly I wasn't anymore. I was so scared," she said, "so certain my life was over. And then you appeared like some kind of angel and saved us, saved Rose and saved me. I never really thanked you properly for that." "You thank me every day," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Every morning when I wake up beside you. Every evening when I come home to a house full of warmth and love. Every time I look at our son and think about the future we're building. That's all the thanks I'll ever need." "I love you," she said simply, "more than I can express." "I love you too, both of you, all three of you," he corrected, nodding toward Rose. "My family, everything I never knew I needed until I had it." "Do you want more children?" Beatrice asked. "I know we talked about it before, but now that James is here, now that you know what it's really like, do you still want a big family?" "If we're blessed that way, yes," he said without hesitation. "As many as we're given and you're willing to have. I think James would benefit from having siblings, and I love the idea of this house full of children and noise and life." "Then we'll have more," she said contentedly. "When the time is right, when James is a bit older and I've recovered fully, we have time. We have all the time in the world." The years that followed proved the truth of those words. Life continued its steady progression, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their family. Rose flourished, becoming a beautiful and intelligent young woman who eventually trained as a teacher and took a position at the Porterville School. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy who shadowed his father everywhere, learning the ways of the ranch with eager hands and a quick mind. 2 years after James, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, a delicate child with her mother's eyes and her father's determination. 3 years after that came twin boys, Samuel and Robert, who kept everyone on their toes with their mischief and boundless energy. Each child was welcomed with joy, each birth celebrated, each new personality adding to the rich tapestry of their family life. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Colton's skill with horses became known throughout the region, and he began breeding and training horses specifically for sale, adding a lucrative income stream to the cattle operation. Beatrice's management of the household and the accounts kept everything running smoothly, and her garden provided not only food for their table, but surplus to sell in town. They faced challenges, of course. There were dry years when water was scarce, and they had to make difficult decisions about the herd. There was the year when disease swept through the cattle, and they lost a significant portion of their stock. There were the usual injuries and illnesses that came with ranch life, the broken bones and fevers and accidents that sent Beatrice's heart into her throat with fear. But they weathered every storm together, their partnership strong enough to handle whatever life threw at them. When times were tough, they leaned on each other, drawing strength from their unity. When times were good, they celebrated together, grateful for every blessing. As the children grew older, taking on more responsibilities on the ranch and beginning to make their own ways in the world, Beatrice and Colton found themselves with time to simply be together again. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, hands intertwined, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved and passed down to the next generation. They would talk about everything and nothing, comfortable in the silence as much as in the conversation, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting. "Do you remember the day we met?" Beatrice asked one evening when they were both approaching their 50s and their hair was showing threads of silver. "I was so young and so frightened, so certain my life was ending. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen," Colton said, "terrified but still fighting for your sister, still trying to protect her even when you had nothing left to fight with. That's when I knew you were special. That's when I knew I wanted you in my life, even if I didn't fully understand what that meant yet. You gave me everything," she said softly. "A home, a family, a life worth living. You gave me love when I thought I would never find it. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. How can I ever repay that?" "You already have," he said, lifting her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her weathered knuckles. "Every day for the last 30 years, you've repaid it by being my wife, my partner, my love, by giving me children and building this life with me, by making me happier than I ever thought possible. There's no debt between us, Beatrice. There never was. Just love, just us." Rose, now married herself with children of her own, often brought her family to visit. James had taken over the day-to-day running of the ranch, proving himself a worthy successor to his father. Catherine had married a lawyer in Fresno, but returned home frequently. The twins had gone into business together, running a successful freight operation that served the entire valley. At family gatherings, when the house was full of children and grandchildren and the noise level was almost unbearable, Beatrice would catch Colton's eye across the room and they would share a smile. This was what they had built, this legacy of love and family and belonging. This proof that kindness mattered, that taking a chance on someone could change everything. That love was the most powerful force in the world. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Colton took Beatrice back to Porterville, to the general store where they had met. Henderson had long since passed away, and the store was now run by his grandson, a young man who had heard the story of the rancher and the thief and the marriage that resulted. "This is where it all started," Colton said, standing in the same spot where he had first seen her. "Right here. You were standing by the door with that loaf of bread, looking like your world was ending, and Henderson was bellowing about thieves. And you walked in and changed everything," Beatrice finished, leaning against him. "I still can't quite believe it sometimes, that it all worked out, that we got our happy ending." "It's not an ending," Colton said firmly. "It's still going, still happening. We have years left, Beatrice, years to watch our grandchildren grow, to see what James makes of the ranch, to enjoy the life we've built. This story isn't over yet." "Good," she said, "because I'm not ready for it to be over. I want more years with you, want to be that old couple sitting on the porch holding hands when we're 80. Want to have lived every possible moment of this beautiful life we've created." "Then that's what we'll do," he promised. "Grow old together, surrounded by family and love. Keep building on what we've started. Keep being grateful for every day we have." They lived those words in the years that followed. Colton and Beatrice aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. They became the heart of the family, the ones everyone turned to for wisdom and comfort. They watched their children succeed and struggle, supported their grandchildren's dreams, and provided a steady foundation of love and stability for the entire family. When Colton was 65, he finally agreed to hand over full control of the ranch to James, though he still helped out with the horses and offered advice when asked. Beatrice continued to manage the household with the help of a daughter-in-law, though she moved at a slower pace now, her joints stiff with age, but their minds remained sharp, and their love remained constant. They celebrated their 40th anniversary with a huge party on the ranch, attended by what seemed like half the county. Their children and grandchildren put together a book of memories, stories of Colton and Beatrice, and the impact they had had on so many lives. There were tales of kindness and generosity, of the times Colton had helped neighbors in need, just as he had once helped a desperate woman in a store. There were stories about Beatrice's wisdom, her ability to make everyone feel welcome, her skill at bringing people together. As Beatrice listened to the speeches and looked around at all the faces gathered to celebrate their love, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 40 years ago, she had been caught stealing bread, desperate and alone with a sick sister and no prospects. Now she was surrounded by family and friends, loved and respected, with a life so rich and full she could hardly believe it was real. "What are you thinking?" Colton asked, pulling her close as they swayed to the music someone was playing on a fiddle. "That I'm the luckiest woman alive," she said honestly. "That I should have been destroyed by desperation and poverty and bad circumstances. But instead, I found you. Found this life. Found everything I never even knew I wanted. The luck was mine," he insisted. "I was the one who was saved that day, Beatrice. You brought light into my life when I had resigned myself to darkness. You gave me purpose and joy, and a reason to be better than I was. Everything good in my life flows from you." "Then we saved each other," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him despite their audience. "And we've spent 40 years building something beautiful from that salvation." "Here's to 40 more," someone called out, raising a glass, and the crowd echoed the toast. "I'll drink to that," Colton said, smiling down at his wife with eyes that held all the love of 4 decades and still wanted more. They didn't get 40 more years, though they came close. Colton passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, with Beatrice holding his hand and his children and grandchildren gathered around to say goodbye. His last words were of love for his family and gratitude for the life he had lived. Beatrice followed him 2 years later, her heart finally giving out after a lifetime of loving so fiercely and completely. She died in the house Colton had built, in the bed they had shared for more than 50 years, surrounded by family and at peace with the life she had lived. At her funeral, Rose, now an elderly woman herself, stood to speak about the sister who had raised her and loved her and never given up on her, even in the darkest times. "My sister was caught stealing bread when she was 20 years old," she began, her voice strong despite her age. "She was desperate and scared and thought her life was over. But a cowboy walked into that store and saw past her crime to her humanity. He paid for the bread, took us home, and gave us a chance at life. That act of kindness changed everything. It created this family, built this legacy, and proved that one moment of compassion can ripple out through generations." She looked around at the crowd gathered to mourn Beatrice Edwards, at the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who existed because of a chance meeting in a general store. "My sister taught me that love can heal anything," Rose continued. "That family isn't just about blood, but about choice and commitment. That hard work and determination can overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the darkest moments, if we're brave enough to accept help when it's offered and wise enough to give help when we see someone in need." Beatrice and Colton's love story wasn't just theirs. It belongs to all of us who were shaped by it, inspired by it, created by it. They showed us what it means to build a life together, to face challenges as partners, to never give up on each other or the dreams you share. They loved fiercely and completely, and they left this world better than they found it. That's a legacy worth celebrating. That's a life well lived. As Rose sat down, James rose to add his own words. "My father used to tell me about the day he met my mother. He said he walked into that store with no thought beyond getting supplies, and he walked out with his entire future. He said helping her was the easiest decision he ever made because he looked in her eyes and saw strength and courage and everything he had ever wanted in a partner. They weren't perfect people. They made mistakes. They had arguments and disagreements like any couple. But they never stopped choosing each other, never stopped working on their relationship, never stopped being grateful for what they had built together." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "They taught us that love is a verb, not just a feeling, that it requires daily effort and conscious choice, that you have to keep showing up, keep trying, keep putting the other person first even when it's hard, They taught us about integrity and compassion and the importance of helping others. They built this ranch not just as a business, but as a home, a place where family would always be welcome and love would always be abundant. They gave us roots and wings both, and I cannot imagine a greater gift. The funeral ended with the entire family gathered at the graveside, laying Beatrice to rest beside Colton under the shade of an old oak tree on the ranch they had built together. The sun was setting as the last prayers were said, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, and it seemed fitting somehow. A beautiful ending to a beautiful story, a peaceful conclusion to lives well lived. In the years that followed, the ranch continued to thrive under James's management and eventually passed to his children. The Edwards family remained a pillar of the community, known for their fairness and generosity and the strong values that Colton and Beatrice had instilled. The story of how the family began, of the thief and the cowboy, and the act of kindness that changed everything, became a legend passed down through the generations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the California Valley, descendants of Colton and Beatrice would sit on the old porch and tell the story again, would talk about how desperation and compassion collided in a general store in Porterville and created something lasting and beautiful, would marvel at how a single choice to help rather than condemn, to see humanity rather than crime, had rippled out through decades and touched hundreds of lives. The love between Colton Edwards and Beatrice Anderson had been real and deep and transformative. It had built a family, sustained a ranch, and proved that the greatest things in life often come from the smallest acts of kindness. Their story was complete, from that desperate day in 1878 to their peaceful deaths more than 50 years later. And it was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating as an example of what love can do when it's given freely and received gratefully. In the end, that was the legacy they left behind. Not just land and buildings and material wealth, but the knowledge that love matters, that compassion matters, that taking a chance on someone, seeing their worth when others see only their mistakes, can change the course of lives and create beauty from desperation. Colton and Beatrice had lived that truth every day of their marriage, and in doing so, they had created something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. They had built a love story for the ages, started in a moment of crisis and sustained through decades of partnership, and it would never be forgotten by those who came after them.